quite measured and try to avoid some of the hysteria. So I think back to Steve's chart earlier on, one of the first charts, and it said when you ask, I'm paraphrasing, business leader what's important, profit was the most important thing, and innovation came down the bottom. And I think that as IT professionals, we tend to talk about the things which fascinate us, and risk and uncertainty and fear sometimes fascinate us, maybe I think a little bit too much. I think looking for the opportunities is much, much harder to do, and I think the best of us go there. But maybe to one of your earlier points, that you were talking about, you know, does Ireland have an advantage? Don't we have an advantage in things like big data? But we have a huge advantage in that we're a small, internationally focused island. So if I have an idea for a data set that I think would help me calculate my local property tax, I can go to the CSO in Mahon and they will help. Or I can go to Fingal County Council and they'll probably help as well. Or we can find opportunities to work together. So we work quite closely with the NUI in Maynooth on the Dublink project, where we put GPS sensors on the buses and we measure the movement around the city. And that's interesting from a getting to work perspective. But if you take the same data, which is anonymized and shared with other transport providers, you get even better insights, because maybe then the city authorities can use the same data to better plan the development of the road network, or maybe the major sports venues like the Aviva in Dublin's case could use the same information to better anticipate if this many people are arriving in the next half hour, we can have the right number of people at security to make sure you got your ticket, and then the right number of people 50 minutes later at the concession stands to sell your jerseys, which is what they really want to be doing. I think policy-wise, we're probably moving as fast as we can. If I look at the quality of what our state authorities, central government and local authorities make available, it's really, really good. I had a student recently who was doing a thesis on the local property tax, and she managed by herself to calculate the value of my house using publicly available data from the property price register, from the rent regulator, from Fingal Coco, about the number and type of civic amenities where I live in North County Dublin. She couldn't get to like a detailed budget spend from Fingal Coco, but what she could find was open data sets from fixmystreet.org showing what Fingal County Council had fixed in my area, which she used as an analogy for how my tax gets spent. So that's all public data made available by public authorities, which she just refactored. It's a great citizen developer kind of example, but using, you know, open source free technology, using data available from state authorities. I think it's a really good example.
I think from a public policy side, I think some of the procurement agreements that the government of Ireland gets into with big institutions could be revised more in the public interest and less in the private sector type of interest. Because I think the interest has been, or so far many of the big agreements have been, you will help us produce this particular data set, you will maintain the ownership of that data set, you will let us use that data set, but they don't allow the public to reuse that data set. You can resell it to the public. So I think there needs to be some better business models around procurement of data in the public interest. I think there needs to also be perhaps some improved public policy by county councils, for instance, and other government agencies in doing an inventory of their data, releasing their data under better licensing, and developing technologies to make those data accessible. From an entrepreneurship side, all we need to think of is weather stations around the world make money from public data. In-car navigation systems are doing very well by using street networks based on public data sets generally. We think of Google, for instance. We have an open data site called GeoGratis in Canada that shares GeoGratis and GeoBase that creates a mosaic of the street network files produced by the provinces and territories. The provinces and territories said, okay, we will collaborate in an accord to put this data set together, but because we're collaborating, we cannot charge royalties on these data sets, so we'll put that into the public domain. And they did that also with satellite imagery. So Google uses Canadian public data satellite imagery as their base file. So big business can do well. And and the argument is if business can do well using public data, it will return money back into the public space with terms of taxation, employment, and so on. But we're also seeing some really interesting small companies emerging. So one of my favorite ones in Canada is called aja.ca. And what they did is they page scraped, which is essentially a way of gathering information via an interesting algorithm from public websites on philanthropy in Canada and foundation funding and how government funds various philanthropic organizations, as well as doing a deep, deep analysis of all of their annual reports combined with the charitable data donation type of data and the charitable registry that is produced just through the taxation system and registering and incorporation, and being able to sell back a service to the charitable and nonprofit sector as to where can you find money, where can you find funding, what are the funding cycles, how do you get a handle on those funding cycles, which government agency is doing what when, and who's been successful and who hasn't. So that's all on open data. Some not so open, because if you're page scraping, it means it's not being delivered in a useful format. So the formats could be better. Yeah, the formats could be better. So part of their model is providing the service of doing that analytics of these types of data. So those aren't big data. Those are actually a bunch of small data sets that have just been very uniquely combined into a tool that's become very helpful for the public, the philanthropic sector, and as well as to understand a huge sector, multi-million-dollar sector in the Canadian context. So I think there's some very, very interesting business tools. We have another project in Canada called 511.ca, and we like to tease in Canada that we have 2 seasons, winter and construction. And which means that the roads are jammed all the time in the summer in big cities, because that's when all the repairs happen. And so you need some kind of app to tell you where the repairs are occurring so that you can move. So much like we were talking about earlier. Well, this is one of the first open data projects that's created by an open data entrepreneur working with open data street network maps, working with the different public agencies that are dealing with all of the permits, as well as real-time information, but doing so in a very interesting, interoperable, open source, open architecture kind of way, but also partially funded by the federal government spatial data infrastructure. So we're starting to see some government supporting of private sector, some NGO supporting, and some new, unique, and interesting small businesses that I don't think we would have seen otherwise. It's not a panacea. There aren't millions of these small companies, but I think they're going to start.
I think the potential for open data is really about how much imagination, I suppose, we have, and the culture of entrepreneurship. I think socially in Ireland, north and south here, particularly, I suppose, particularly in the south, we might punish entrepreneurs who fail at their first attempt, whereas in America they see it as, I don't know whether it's the same in Canada, but I presume so, and certainly in the States, it's seen as a badge of honour, and you need to have 2 or 3 failures before you've almost earned the right to have a success. And in Ireland that's completely different. You know, we would kind of whisper and maybe mock people who have had a bash and failed, and we've got to change that, and it's only people like us in this room that can change that, so we've got to change that culturally. But there's a really good example. It's somewhere between, no, this is a bit unsavoury actually, and I know we're having our breakfast, but this is an example, a really good example of how open data can be used productively on behalf of society. It's a not-for-profit, but it's not, it's a not-for-profit thing, but it's not necessarily government. So in New York, and some of you might have heard about this example, in New York they have a problem. The sewer system was built in the early 1900s, and what happens is it's fine. The sewer system is absolutely fine. The sewage goes through, it's treated, and then it's pushed out to sea, and that's fine, unless there is a rainstorm. And if there's a rainstorm, the sewage network overflows, and the filters are opened, and all of the raw sewage goes into the Hudson untreated. So there's a website or a movement, I suppose, and it brings together the kind of the maker movement, and it kind of brings together the Internet of Things and just this culture of kind of smart cities or connected cities. So all of this kind of stuff matches up, and it's called don'tflushme.org. No, this is serious. No, this is serious. So the idea is for lots of people who are concerned about this, they subscribe to this website, and you put in your mobile phone number, you put in your Twitter handle. And if you're interested in taking part in this, whenever there are sensors that these guys installed in the city's sewers with Mayor Bloomberg's permission, and this tweets out whenever the water levels reach a certain level within the New York sewer system, saying, look, this is, if you don't flush, if you're concerned about this, don't flush now until the water levels subside again. Then you get a text message in half an hour, 40 minutes, and all of the rainwater is flushed through the system, and it can go ahead. So people who are concerned about ancient infrastructure, their individual ability to make some small part in making sure this, they're not destroying the local environment, that is what this system's called. It's called don'tflushme.org, and it's really good. That's a really good example of people who care, individuals who care, using good technology to do something good for their own immediate environment.